The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. The Canada and United States relationship is undergoing considerable change. Many point to the incoming administration of Donald Trump as to the reason why. However, there are many issues that supersede Mr. Trump's election, issues that have been building over many years. Outgoing US Ambassador to Canada David Cohen points to Canada's failure to meet NATO targets despite having signed on to meeting them more than a decade ago. He says that failure is having an impact. He continues, there's no doubt that what you hear from American politicians, from other NATO allies about Canada falling so consistently short, has hurt Canada's standing in the world from a defense-related perspective. Cohen acknowledged Canada is starting to increase defense spending, but adds the United States would like Canada to spend more. And then there is the issue of border security and immigration policy, an issue that prompted President-elect Donald Trump to threaten us with a 25% tariff on all imports until Canada works to stop the flow of illegal drugs and migrants. I invited U.S. Ambassador David Cohen to join me for a conversation that matters about a path forward that can ensure a positive and financially beneficial relationship for both countries. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Stu. It's a pleasure to be on your air.
We do have a wonderful relationship, don't we?
We really do. I don't think there's any time in history where the relationship between the United States and Canada has been stronger, more significant, and more durable than it is today. And I think that is due to both Canada and the United States, and it's due to a lot of forces at play here that go beyond who the President of the United States is or who the Prime Minister is.
I'm encouraged to hear you say that because I worry that maybe on our side of the equation, Canada's, that we are putting a little bit of a stress on that relationship.
So, I have analogized in the past that the relationship between Canada and the United States is really a lot like a family. We're so close. We've been so close for such a long period of time. And we have our differences, but we tend to be able to work our differences out in a civil manner and usually without a lot of damage to the relationship. But the other side of that coin is that, like any family, we do have our disagreements. And I worry a little bit from your introduction that sometimes there may be too much focus on our disagreements and not enough focus on the many things that we're doing well together and right together, which is ultimately what makes the relationship so powerful, so strong, and so durable. But that is not to say that at any point in time that there aren't ways to improve the relationship. And that there aren't things that Canada could do, or quite frankly, that the United States could do as well to continue to improve the relationship and remove some of the choppy waters from the relationship.
I think that if you look at basically the cultural makeup of both Canada and the United States, there are so many similarities. And that, I think, is an enduring bond. There's no doubt about it.
The cultural similarity, it's almost the shared values, which are part of the culture, but the commitments to, it's funny, before I was ambassador, I would have used these words, but I don't know that they have the same meaning to me that they do today. But the commitment that both countries have to democracy as a way of living, as a principle of governance, the commitment that both countries have to equity and to diversity and to the treatment of all people, equally in terms of giving them equal opportunity. These are strongly held underlying values that absolutely bind our countries together.
I have a prop with me right at the moment. It's a book that was written back in the mid-1970s. It's called Between Friends, published on the Canadian side, and it was an expression of a great gratitude. And I flipped the page open to a quote from former U.S. President John Kennedy, and he said, "We share common values from the past, common aspirations for the future, our future, and indeed the future of all mankind. And I do believe that collectively we do set a shining example.
So that, I actually not sure I've heard that Kennedy quote before about the U.S.-Canada relationship, but boy, that really captures it. I think captures it in a very powerful fashion. And if I can, it goes to what I was saying before. That is, in my view, the definition of the relationship, the ultimate definer of the durability of the relationship. And with that as a defining characteristic, the things that Canada does that might be a little irritating, the things the United States does, that might be a little bit irritating on the Canadian side, it puts them in perspective, and it gives us all a reason to work to overcome those irritations, those glitches, what I call choppy waters, because in the end, it is what Kennedy said that we all want to define our relationship.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. One of the things that I am very aware of course, is that the geopolitical forces around the world are changing, and that Canada and the United States, along with Mexico, we need to be aware of that and what the pressures are that are put upon us. And for the United States to thrive, of course, it has to feel secure, but it also has to have that same sense of security with its neighbors. And this is where I think that there are some issues that Canada needs to potentially step up to the plate. From your perspective, what would you like to see us do more of? I know that you have indicated in the past that you'd like to see us spend more money on defense, but what else can we do that our interests are aligned to create economic and physical security?
Well, I do think that spending money is a factor. And your introduction accurately reported some things that I said, but in a context, I also made the point and would continue to make the point that on an overall basis, the United States is happy and satisfied with the renewed commitments that Canada has made. And they're more than financial commitments. It is a philosophical commitment to continental defense, to Arctic defense, to working together with the United States to defend our homeland and to put our homeland in a better position for protecting against incursions by Russia and China, by way of principal example. And I think so we obviously would like to see Canada continue to follow through on those commitments. And again, it's more than spending money, it's spending money in the right places and with the right focus on where the money is being spent. And I really do think it's a place where Canada's made enormous progress from the perspective of the United States. I think, it's hard to, it's hard to define these issues without making it seem like either I'm being picayune or I'm being unfairly negative about the relationship. But before Donald Trump's comments in the last couple of months, our issues with the border and in particular law enforcement cooperation and aligning our values about what the border should look like. Canada has had a much freer and open attitude toward immigration and people crossing its borders than the United States has had. The United States had a very free attitude as well, but I think Canada's gone beyond where the United States is. And it is interesting to see that Canada's adjusting some of those values now because border may have been a little too open. And all of a sudden Canada's under threats, in part because of policies of how it treats new Canadians, to maybe begin to control a little bit who it is that's coming into Canada and under what terms and conditions. And, if I will, Canada's starting to resemble the United States a little bit in wanting to still be known as a country that is open to all, but maybe with a few more controls on it than what existed in the past. And the relevance of this is that unfortunately, reality of life is that there are many people who choose to enter Canada who are choosing to enter Canada because they think it may be easier to get to the United States through Canada than it would be from their home nations. And so Canada, for example, reinstituting or partially reinstituting visa requirements for Mexico has probably helped to control the flow of Mexicans into the United States from the north, let alone from the south.
I moderated an event a couple of weeks ago about security in North America and in Canada. And what came out of that at one point was Canada, as far as bad actors, international bad actors are concerned, as they go easy target, low risk, high rate of return. It's not a reputation that we want to have, but it's one that the United States must be watching. And as you pointed out, if we're starting to tighten up some of those policies, do they then start to become more in line with what the United States would like to see?
Yeah. Look, I think the whole issues around foreign interference, misinformation, disinformation, you've talked about changes in global politics, the increasing influence of transnational criminal organizations. I think all of those issues are places where the United States and Canada have been deepening their cooperation and deepening their work together, and I think that was absolutely called for and absolutely appropriate to happen. It's nothing I'd call out as a major U.S.-Canada problem, but all of those issues, those trends that I mentioned, are major problems for Canada and the United States, and it's really nice to see the growing alignment on the part of Canada with United States approaches and values in that space.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You know, we're seeing changes, of course, in Asia Pacific and the alignment there, especially since the first Trump administration. There's been movement away from being based in China into other South Asian countries, but now we hear about nearshoring or bringing many of those businesses back to North America, but not necessarily into the United States, partly because of the rules that prevent especially Chinese foreign direct investment into the U.S. How careful does Canada need to be in whom it attracts and allows to set up to do business here, if we want to be able to maintain that open relationship with the U.S.?
Well, I think Canada needs to be careful, and I think Canada is careful. And in fact, new legislation has been passed that provides increased powers for the Canadian government to block foreign investment into Canada. And I think Canada needs to be careful about that, but I think Canada needs to be careful about that in defense of its own sovereignty, first and foremost. It will have an ancillary effect of aligning itself more closely with the United States and the investment screening that the United States has had in place for many years. But when I tell you a story, when I went through my Senate confirmation hearings in 2021 to become the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, the only substantive question I was asked was related to whether Canada was being tough enough on China. That was the only substantive question that was on the table for this, and what I saw my role as ambassador in helping to toughen up the Canadian approach to China. And with Canada's new Indo-Pacific strategy, which was released in 2022-23, I think at the time I said that the United States was pleased to see that policy, and that we generally viewed that policy as more closely aligning Canada with United States policies with respect to China.
When we take a look at the border, the interesting challenge for Canada is, of course, It's a long border, longest uninterrupted border in the world.
That is correct.
And our resources are not as robust as, let's say, they are on the American side. What do we need to do on our side of the border so that we can protect the United States and ourselves from the relatively easy passage in wide open spaces for people to cross that line?
Yep. So I want to be careful answering that question because I don't want to overstate what I think the problem is. I think there are problems, but they are not. The problems don't even compare to the problems that are on the southern border. So if you look at the movement of people that who are not properly credentialed, what I might call irregular migration, or what our Customs and Border Protection Agency measures by contacts of people without proper credentials on the United States side of the border, from 2022 to 2024. Those contacts increased between 300% and 400%, so to record levels. And we saw that happening. We, the United States, saw that happening. Canada saw it happening as well. We did not call press conferences and issue series of social media commentary about this. We went to the Canadians, we identified it, and we've been working together with the Canadians in identifying the causes for those increases. And we've been studying different levers that we can use to help bring that under control. And in fact, in the last 6 months, those numbers have gone down about 50%. So they're still at high levels. It's still an issue, still continues to require attention, but it's typical and appropriate of the U.S.-Canada relationship that we are working on those together. And we are trying to recognize that one of the great strengths of Canada and the U.S. is the frictionless border. It helps contribute to the unbelievable trade relationship that we have, $3.4 billion a day in goods and services trade across that border. And part of that's due to the frictionless border. It is part of the strength that we talked about and durability of the relationship is the freedom of Americans and Canadians to cross the border, to visit each other, to vacation in each other's countries. And so we want to be careful not to overreact and to make the border too rigid and not enable lawful exchanges and lawful trips and lawful traveling across the border. Just, you know, I'm in British Columbia today as we're talking, and I've been out here this week. And an amazing more than 6 million Americans visited British Columbia last year, which is basically back to pre-pandemic levels. So we want to encourage that. We want to encourage that tourism. We want to encourage people to go back. So we have to be careful not to make the border so difficult to navigate that will harm the people-to-people interactions and travel and the lawful trade that crosses the border, which is what makes a more nuanced approach to making the border a little tougher is what's necessary. And there are also policies that go on top of policing of the border. Policies like visa requirements for Mexico and for some other questionable countries. And again, Canada's been taking steps to deal with that. There was reference I saw in yesterday's press in Canada about the practice of flagpoling, which is a way to sort of jump the line for getting visas, and which we estimate is causing a significant number of these irregular migratory moves or illegal contacts on the U.S. side of the border. That's a policy change that Canada could make that would bring flagpoling more under control than what it is today. All this said, I'm going to go back to where I started and understand that if you compare our northern border, that is the Canada-U.S. border, to our southern border, that is the Mexico-U.S. border, the problems and the issues we have with irregular migration and with these illegal contacts measured in the same way that we have on the south they dwarf the problems that we have in the north. The Canadian illegal contacts, if you will, are less than 10%, 5 to 10% of what the contacts are on the southern part of the border. So that's why I don't want to overreact to this,
Right.
And why I think it's important to put it in context for your audience.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. One last issue that I'm quite fascinated in and believe that it's a real area of opportunity for both countries is the development of the natural resources that are going to be required to meet our energy needs in the future. We have fossil fuels, which we know, but the swing towards electrification requires a shift in the way in which critical minerals are sourced. Globally right now, China has much more of a handle and hold on those.
Maybe an 80% share or more for many critical minerals.
We've got them in the ground here in Canada and in the United States, but we're very slow at being able to bring them to market. What can we do collectively to help to ensure that we have a secure supply of these mineral sources?
So this has been one of my priorities in my tenure as ambassador here, has been to work to improve coordination, improve strategy, improve execution in the critical minerals space as between Canada and the United States. And that is a very complicated question. By the way, it's very important you reference minerals in the ground. Dealing with critical minerals is about a lot more than getting them out of the ground. You also have to build refining capacity, processing capacity, and manufacturing capacity. My example of this is, let's take lithium as one critical mineral in the electric battery supply chain. Even if magically we could figure out a way to accelerate mining regulation and mining permitting to be able to get all the lithium to meet North America's demands out of the ground in the next few years. That is, if we can solve mining regulation, permitting problems, financing problems for just that. If we don't at the same time build the processing, refining, and manufacturing capacity, we'll produce that lithium, and the only thing we'll be able to do with it is to sell it to Chinese companies, which will process it, refine it, and manufacture it, and we're still going to have Chinese lithium. Right. We will not have solved the problem at all. So it requires dealing with the entire supply chain, and the barriers, in addition to regulatory barriers and mining regulation barriers, are financing barriers. For Canada, they're market scale barriers of just not having the scale to be able to produce the demand. That in turn creates financing barriers, because in the end, it's private sector investment that is going to provide the capital to be able to build this critical mineral supply chain. And Canada just doesn't have sufficient scale to be able to attract the external third-party private sector investment that you're going to need to be able to fully exploit critical minerals and build an overall critical mineral supply chain. That is where the importance of government incentives come in, which sometimes may not be that popular. And one of the things we've worked on at Mission Canada in the United States and in Canada is to each develop our own set of governmental financial incentives to facilitate the extraction, refinement, processing, and manufacturing of critical minerals, and figure out a way to work together to be able to leverage each other's programs. So one of the key tools in the United States for this is the Defense Production Act. I'm enormously proud of the fact that in the last 3 years, under the Defense Production Act, the United States has provided financing to 6 Canadian companies in the critical minerals space. 4 of those 6 have also received Canadian financial support and financial incentives, enabling us to leverage the Canadian support, Canada to leverage the US support. One of those companies, by the way, is a British Columbia company, NATO. And so we've got like a great example of coordinating, communicating, and cooperating is enabling a Canadian company in the critical minerals space to be able to build capacity, hopefully stand on its own 2 feet, and then attract the private sector investment that it needs to fully exploit its reserves.
And to continue to build the strong relationship that exists between both countries.
Correct.
Great note to end on. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on the air.